Shouting button do betting do betting to bebop dot to bebop. Yap. Loop to bam bam to to loop to bam bam boom beat to bebop.
After World War II, a new style of jazz was evolving on the second floor of Minton's Playhouse on 118th Street in Harlem. With its focus on improvisation, bebop revived the art of jazz, allowing it to be open to evolution again. It became the musical representative of the 50s outcry for change. Through lifestyle, language, and dress, bebop musicians defied the limitations set by stereotypes of black culture. And by rejecting concepts that had become mainstream to music and replacing them with faster tempos, complex melodies, and chord progressions, bebop forever elevated the status of jazz to that of an art form. In 1941, America entered World War II. During that time, swing was king. Men and women of the armed forces took the uplifting music overseas as their symbol of democracy at a time when they were fighting oppression. It encouraged millions to be positive, gather, and dance during times of adversity. It was played from ice cream parlors to drugstores. For 20 years now, swing had been in, and the record companies rushed in to capitalize.
By the late 30s, early 40s, the swing phenomenon had passed from popularity into commerce, and all of those groups began to sound the same, identical. And so then you get bebop, which then emphasizes improvisation, emphasizes African rhythms, you know, and re-emphasizes blues. And then you get people like Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk, you know, Dizzy Gillespie, you know, the people that say made the kind of revolution in the 40s, the bebop revolution. It was to revitalize the music by, you know, taking it away from commercial swing.
The commercialization of swing made it impossible for any musical evolution, and its mass-market capitalism meant that jazz was stuck in big bands, soggy rhythms, arrangers, vertical harmonies, and non-playing orchestra leaders. Musicians wanted to move on. There was limited creative freedom in the business that had become swing. Many musicians found that their talents and thoughts could not be expressed through swing any longer. Said to be the creator of bebop, Charlie Parker was a major contributor in the evolution of jazz. While playing in a New York jam session, he had a revelation that would become the foundation for modern jazz and forever change the way musicians thought of music.
I remember one night I was jamming in a chili house on 7th Avenue between 139th and 140th. It was December 1939. Now, I'd been getting bored with the stereotype changes that were being used all the time at that time, and I kept thinking there's bound to be something else. I could hear it sometimes, but I couldn't play it. Well, that night, I found that by using the higher intervals of a chord as a melody line and backing them with appropriately related changes, I could play the thing I'd been hearing. I came alive.
Taken from Downbeat magazine in 1950. Bebop was spontaneous, complicated, and played at a frantic pace. By diverging from musical concepts of its time, bop gave jazz musicians the freedom and inspiration to cultivate new musical ideas. To play bop required one to appreciate the intellectually technical side of the music, thus elevating the status of jazz musicians. It was also loud, so loud that Time magazine featured an article about bebop titled, "How Deaf Can You Get?" It read, "When Dizzy Gillespie hit Sweden and Denmark, the halls were barely big enough to hold all the beboppers. In Paris, zealous French zazous, or jazz fans, came to blows over him. Last week, Manhattan's Carnegie Hall was full of beboppers. Bebop was apparently no laughing matter. In Carnegie Hall, no one had to strain to hear what frantic trumpeter Gillespie and his 15 boppers had to say. Whatever else, bebop is screechingly loud. It is also breathlessly fast with some biting dissonance and shifty rhythms. The article went on to say that its feverish practitioners like to wear barrettes, goatees, and green-tinted horned-rimmed glasses and talk about their interesting new sound. Bebop started developing its own counterculture. Instead of performing as big bands in huge dance halls as swingers did, beboppers performed in small groups in packed nightclubs with small instrumentation. Where the big bands of swing were catered to dancers, bebop was almost strictly for listening. Swingers played elaborate arrangements, boppers praised technical skill, and put emphasis on the ability of the soloist. Bebop's melodies were extremely complicated. It was spontaneous music, played at a frantic pace. To many outsiders, this was perceived as thoughtless disturbance of order. Beboppers were known to speak in complex sentences, made up of phrases and terms only the hippest cats could use correctly. But their innovative play on words was not just for fun. Through the use of a language as complex as their music, Black hipsters were constantly defying the stereotype of the stuttering, tongue-tied Sambo and the incompetent Mammy. To be a hipster required one to challenge the limitations set by stereotypes of race. Beboppers created and made popular terms such as the Big Apple, hip, lame, and square. By the 1950s, the slang that they had once been criticized for had entered mainstream English.
Bebop was influential in Brazil on people like Antonio Carlos Jobim and Sergio Mendes and in Cuba and all over the world. It had an impact on the music that people were making. People were listening to this music because it was revolutionary.
Coinciding with the civil rights movement, beboppers didn't picket or protest, but their outcry for a change in the social conditions of America was most evident in the way they conducted themselves socially.
What was always fascinating when I went with him, whether he was doing a show or he took me to his home and invited friends over, it was always some sort of integration. It was more outside cultures than I was used to seeing. It was so many different ethnicities at his funeral that I said, wow, this, my uncle was loved by, the music he created caused him to be loved by all kinds of people, not just one group, one ethnicity, but all kinds of people because of the music he played. So that alone to me was a significant integration from a social standpoint that I was able to see and touch and feel. So
I think when you're trying to evaluate Charlie Parker's importance in jazz and in American music, it's difficult to overestimate the influence that he had. There's really no place where you don't see it because chiefly he changed the way we listen to harmonies. He made the whole concept of harmony more complicated so that there's a greater harmonic palette for all of these musicians to use. And then he enriched the music with a whole new vocabulary of melodic phrases.
Half a century after the advent of bebop, the status of jazz as a chamber art form has been affirmed by numerous institutions such as Juilliard, whom acknowledges Dizzy Gillespie as one of the greatest musicians and has jazz improvisation as one of its requirements for a diploma in jazz studies. By breaking down racial barriers in music, venues, and cultures, and while simultaneously developing their own counterculture, beboppers, perhaps unknowingly, were raising the status of jazz music and of African Americans all over the world.